Right now, though, as you know, and you will have heard their advertisements, and we've talked to them about it, the Free Speech Union, which I would say is the leading proponent organisation that is a proponent of free speech in this country, is running a campaign for you to submit I think a petition against the Department of Internal Affairs proposals to create a new, kind of internet censorship organisation and media censorship organisation, and proposals, that really send a chill down the spine, I think, of decent journalists and people who believe in free speech. But they still advocate in other areas and comment on stories and current events that impact or put pressure on the principles and the ideals of free speech. And a couple of stories have come up in the last week, and we've been frustrated in trying to cover these because the official organisations that make these stories or are involved in these stories play favourites or simply do not talk to the public, even though they're publicly funded. And here are the two stories. To my mind, Jonathan may disagree with me. A Christian teacher, refuses to use the new name of a 14-year-old girl who's got gender dysphoria, who says she's a boy. She complains. He goes to the teacher's disciplinary tribunal, and he is deregistered as a maths teacher. And he says, I can't buy into this non-binary, I can change gender BS because of my religious beliefs, because I'm a Christian. And this narcissistic little darling has him, in the end, her complaint has him struck off as a teacher. And the other one is that the gorgeous Broadcasting Standards Authority, which we are not subject to here on the platform yet, though those other proposals I talked about will make us so, in some way. The BSA has come out with, and it's kind of related, a new set of rules on covering transgender issues. And you're not allowed to, and it's a thing called dead naming, it's a made-up thing. You can't tell a Sheila who thinks she's a bloke, you can't call them a bloke a Sheila, even if they are a Sheila. If they want to be called a bloke, that's dead naming. And the BSA says it's going to, it might take action on that. And that basically we should be woke in the language we use about transgenderism and gender issues, and also that it will not take complaints about people who call men women and women men, because it's sick and tired of taking those complaints. It's like it won't take complaints anymore about using Māori in certain circumstances. So it's decided what you can complain about. Well, for a view on these things, which I think in some ways go back to free speech, we are joined now by Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union. Jonathan, good morning to you.
Very good morning to you, Sean.
How is the campaign going? Before we get going
very
further?
Well. We've had thousands of Kiwis use our submission tool to submit. You call it the DIA, the Department of Internal Affairs proposals. I think that's letting the government off the hook.
Okay, government proposals. Yeah, fair enough.
These are the government proposals that want to expand the censorship regime, and I think they've pulled a pretty quick one on the DIA team there, really, who I was shocked had to wear this entirely. The minister didn't front when these were announced. The government hasn't commented on them once. Yeah. They're really going, well, let these public bureaucrats wear this if it's unpopular, but you can be damn sure that if it's popular, they'll take credit for it. And at this stage, it's not. So it looks like the team there are just having to be the ones that carry it.
All right. Okay, Jonathan, let's move on to these other two cases, which are kind of related, and it is the contentious, much-covered issue of transgenderism or gender fluidity or whatever we want to call it. But the problem with this is the BSA's news guidelines, it isn't whatever we want to call it. It's kind of what the BSA thinks you should call it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear from the outset, these are guidelines, and so no one is going to be taken off air at this stage. for not following them. But the point remains that they're very much seeing this issue from one angle, and we were we thought some of what they had to say was acceptable, and some of it is part of the culture that is continuing to accept that only one perspective is actually going to run here.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, I'd go further than that. I'd go right back to the basis. It's called the Broadcasting Standards Authority. It's to enforce whatever standards other people set. It's not there to say what language we should use.
That's right. And these proposals that DIA have put out are disestablishing the BSA and setting up a new authority that take what currently exists and spreads it over this platform, the internet, and on social media and others. And the question is, do you really want these guidelines on your Facebook page as well, or on your Twitter feeds? That's the chilling part. For some time in our society, we've accepted that traditional media, if they're going to have the rights and privileges that come from the media, are going to have some duties with that. And that's not a fight that we're getting into at this stage. We're not trying to campaign against the existence of the BSA or the Advertising Standards Authority or other bodies like that. But the point is that they have always been relegated to what formal media have to say and the duties that are incumbent on them. It has never extended to individuals and their speech, or to outfits that have specifically chosen to be alternative media. And Sean, for the strengths of your programming, you are alternative media.
I'm not. I'm just a journalist. It just
you don't have the duties. You don't have the duties that are incumbent on you.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do, Jonathan. I have the duties of civil law, the laws of defamation, the laws of commercial practice. There's plenty of law that covers and regulates what I do.
Absolutely, but that is not part of the BSA.
No.
And so, no.
I don't have a chalk monitor looking over my shoulder telling me what to think, like every other mainstream media organisation. I mean, the BSA's a joke, Jonathan. I've been on it. It's a bunch of wokies who are scared of their own shadow. I had to leave it because I got cancel cultured by a whole lot of Green Party activists. And I sat there and looked at fellow board members who didn't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to it. So I resigned, as they couldn't fire me.
You're not going to hear me on this programming trying to defend the BSA. The point is that what Kiwi society has generally said is, look, we don't want to hear the F word on the 6 o'clock news, that kind of thing. That in the past has been the extent of the duties that have been on journalists, which if you wanted to spout off using expletives here, there wouldn't be recourse against you. My point is we're now seeing this, and it's just an example, as you're saying, from many other examples as well. This being weaponized and used not only to just keep some basic standards in place that don't relate to content, and actually put the fingers on the scale of what content is allowed. And so we see the BSA come out and say that they're not going to shut down journalists who choose to use transgender inclusive language. And you know what? Free speech swings both ways. We consistently insist that, and we do think that is positive. We shouldn't see journalists being silenced by the BSA, and if the Media Council adopted a similar guideline, it would extend to print media as well. We don't want to see journalists silenced for their perspective on this issue, just like we don't want to see those who are gender critical silenced for their perspective.
But one gets the feeling this is a one-way street, Jonathan.
That's absolutely right. There's very much a tone within that, where while at the moment we say, yeah, definitely, let's let this go both ways, we haven't seen it swing the other way yet. And, I correct myself slightly there. The BSA did put out a ruling when Professor Kathleen Stock was interviewed by Kim Hill a while back now, saying that was an acceptable interview. A number of people complained that was a transphobic interview and that she shouldn't have been allowed that platform. The BSA did come out and say that Professor Stock's comments there were very much acceptable as part of the public discourse. And so, to their credit, we have seen them defend her right to express herself there and Kim Hill's right to hear from someone who is gender critical. But and it connects with the second story I think you want to discuss today. There is a culture where anyone who has any questions around this is feeling more and more uncomfortable about having that voice heard. And I think it's a general feeling, even those who aren't ardent fighters on this issue, they're still going, hang on a second, things just feel like they're a little bit oppressed at the moment.
So a 14-year-old schoolgirl who thinks she's a bloke and wants to be called a bloke at school, and I don't know at the age of 14 where that idea comes from. A Christian teacher won't call her by a bloke's name, right? And
right.
And he's a Christian and he's a maths teacher. I don't know what mathematics has got to do with gender. He is taken to the Teachers Disciplinary Tribunal and he's deregistered as a teacher, so his career as a teacher is over. That seems to me, at first blush, and I did not attend the hearing, to be an overreaction.
So as far as we understand, there was no hearing. This was a what's called on the papers decision. So each side got to make written submissions, and then the tribunal made a decision. That's what we understand. And look, this is where the use of the word hysteria by the tribunal is just gratuitous, really, and the decision seems very punitive. Let's be clear. This man had already resigned from his position. He was not teaching that student anymore. He was not teaching at that school anymore. As far as I understand, and again, I only have the decision in front of me, but it appears he was an older teacher who possibly was about to retire and just said, look, forget this. I don't have to do this anymore.
Stuff this for a game of soldiers, yep.
And then they came after him. Not only to ensure that he wouldn't teach that student anymore, or not only to ensure that he wouldn't teach at that school anymore, but that he would not have the capacity to provide for himself through the work that he has done in the past. And that, to me, is the really punitive, don't you dare step out of line on this issue approach to me. And I want to be really clear, Sean, this guy did not help himself.
Well, he stood by his principles, whether you agree with them or not. He didn't back down.
Sean, let's be able to hold two things at once here. You can stand by your principles and do it in a way that is reasonable and persuasive and seeks to build bridges where they're possible. And you can stand by your principles by thumping your fists on the table and thinking, nah, and saying, I get to say this.
In what way did he not help himself from your reading of the situation?
Look, I'm a Christian. I hold to many of the same standards of faith that he does. But when he then lists swaths of scripture that have nothing to do with the immediate facts of this case in his submission, where he gets drawn into a host of other issues like homosexuality and abortion that are not relevant to this conversation at all, and are in no way seeking to build a common vision for basic values.
Is he like the rape victim? He brought it on himself, Jonathan.
No, not at all. And that is why, Sean, that we've taken some heat on this, even from our own supporters. There has not been consensus as to whether this is a free speech question. We say the deregistration is too far. So we have come out and supported him for it. But I think we can say that in one breath, Sean, and also say, if we're going to be defending free speech, let's do it in a way that builds bridges, that speaks to common values that we all have, and not distracted with a host of other highly contentious issues. It's just really a tactical question at that level. And what it does is it makes it harder for anyone who does want to come in and defend the basic right for Kiwis to have their say. It makes it a lot harder for us to get traction, to make reasonable, legal, or philosophical arguments when we're trying to root it in very divisive, very disputed so-called authorities.
Yeah. Jonathan, as much as you have criticised some of the stylistic ways in which this teacher, or former teacher, we should call him, mounted his defence, can you give us any insight as into the 14-year-old and what was driving her complaint?
it appears that the two actually had a relatively good relationship. It says in the material that the 14-year-old approached the teacher before he left and said that that they didn't want to end on bad terms, and that they hoped they could wish each other well. And so again, I only have various pieces of material that have been circulated publicly, but it appears to me that there may be a different party here that has actually been the one really pushing.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Did a third agency, did someone like Inside Out or one of those gay or alternative sexuality lobby groups that seem to have infiltrated our schools, were they involved?
That seems very possible. And Sean, I would say with Inside Out, as an example, on a number of fights that we have had, they have been the party at play. And I want to be very clear, the Free Speech Union absolutely stands for the right of speech for the rainbow community, for the transgender community, for all Kiwis. And so this isn't about a one-sided approach. But what it is a particular actor, Inside Out here, being frequently involved in the weaponization of policy and of codes of conduct and of other material to silence.
But they are contracted by the government. They receive lots of taxpayers funded to run pride programs and pride awareness and all sorts of other gay things inside our schools.
In our schools, in our ministries, at our universities. That's my point. It is not just at our secondary school level. They... this is a bit excessive, but they seem to be everywhere. And at one level, they are doing their job at promoting their perspective, which is their right. But they need to do that with deference to others' rights to also have different views. And I don't know whether it's Inside Out, Sean, I want to make that clear, but it does appear that there's another actor at play here who was really involved in making sure that
and stirring up the trouble, whereas the 14-year-old, the teacher might have left to their own devices, come to some sort of accommodation without all the kerfuffle that has occurred.
That's right. And obviously before this complaint was laid, the teacher had already left his role. So if the teacher and the principal had come to a position, that is their business. The point is he would have then had the ability, if he wanted to find employment at another school that says we instruct teachers to use the pronouns based on the biology of the student. And this is where... Sean, this is. I don't want us to be simplistic or binary in this. It's not. It's not very easy to discern how a teacher should carry themselves in the situation. If they are gender critical and if they believe a girl calling herself a boy is harmful to that student, then I think there is a place for them to say, no, it would be harmful for me.
It's harmful to logic and it's harmful to reality. That's maybe the problem, Jonathan.
But I think there is also a case where he refused to use the student's preferred name as well. And the name, I think, is different to a pronoun. My name is Jonathan. My wife calls me Johnny. Is that me changing my identity, or is that referencing something that is more intimate and more appropriate to our relationship? I would say that we're talking about
a 14-year-old girl.
Yeah, but I think when our team discussed this, we then looked at cases in the United States. And in the United States, the government has come out in some states instructing schools that if a student wants to identify with a pronoun that doesn't align with their biology, then the teachers must refer to them by their biological gender. And I don't want to see that kind of overreach by governments either. I think these are decisions that should be made within the schools, by principals and teachers and students.
Yep.
We shouldn't see the stats. So that means in some cases, if a principal and teacher, if they do decide to use preferred pronouns that don't align with biological gender, that should be their right.
Yep.
I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think, again, this must swing both ways.
Yeah, and I would say also, Jonathan, both these stories indicate how far a government will go with the current settings and why we don't need any more of this rubbish or to cede any more control and power to bureaucrats over how we speak and what we can say. I'm just saying they're examples of the need to protect free speech. I think
absolutely right. And we have been accused of fear-mongering around these DIA proposals, the government's proposals there to expand the censorship regime. And while our critics would never give us the credit of this, we try to be thoughtful and really consider the way we engage in these debates. And we step back and thought, are we trying to promote a reaction here that is unconstructive? And I don't think we are. We have people.
I think these are genuine. These are genuine issues, Jonathan. That's why here on the Unregulated Wild West platform, we're happy to have you on. I thank you for your time, mate. That is Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union. So much good stuff to say.